watching this video, please subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for further notifications. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and post your comments below.
Hello everyone, today is 3rd November and this is the election day for the United States presidential election. The presidential election has a typical cycle here in the United States. Before we go to see how that typical cycle works, let's see what is the Constitution's requirement for a presidential candidate. There are three main requirements for a presidential candidate. Number one, at least 35 years of old. Number two, a natural-born citizen of the United States. They have a specific definition for the natural-born citizen. It means someone born with U.S. citizenship include any child born in the United States, or the children of United States citizen born abroad, or those born abroad of one citizen parent. And the last requirement is a resident of the United States for 14 years at least. Okay, the presidential election typical cycle has different process and steps that should be followed, and it starts from the spring of the year before the election. So in the spring of the year before an election, candidates announce their intentions to run. Then from the summer of the year before an election through spring of the election year, primary and caucus debates take place. Next step, January to June of election year, states and parties hold primaries and caucuses. Next, July to early September, parties hold nominating conventions to choose their candidates. Then, from September to October, it means September and October, candidates participate in their presidential debates. After the debates, in early November, the election day happens. After that, in December, electors cast their votes in the Electoral College. The next step, in early January of the next calendar year, Congress counts and certifies the electoral votes. And the last step, which is on January 20th of the next calendar year, is the inauguration day. I'm sure you have heard some terminologies here, including like, Electoral College, electors, primary, caucus, everything. Don't worry, we'll learn about that just in minutes. As you see in this diagram, you can see the presidential election process has 4 steps after the person is eligible for the presidential election. So the first step is primary and caucuses. The second step, or step 2, is national conventions. Step 3 is general election, which is today, the 3rd November. And the fourth step is electoral college. So we will go one by one and see what happens in each step. Step 1, primaries and caucuses. Of course, there are many people who want to be president, and each of these people have their own ideas about how the government should work. People with similar ideas, of course, belong to the same political parties. Okay, now, when everyone wants to be the president, this is where the primaries and caucuses come in. The election process begins with the primary elections and caucuses, of course. These are 2 methods that states uses to select a potential presidential nominee. So these processes all called the nomination process. So for election 2020, many states have delayed their presidential primaries and caucuses due to the coronavirus pandemic, as the last one scheduled for August 11 in Connecticut. So, candidates from each political party campaign throughout the country to win the favor of their party members. And then what happens when after these debates and campaigns are done, it comes to caucus and primary. So let's say what's caucus and what's primary. Caucus is a meeting of the local members of a political party to select delegates to the national party conventions. In a caucus, party members selects the best candidate through a series of discussions and votes. And these meetings or these caucus meetings, they are held at the county, district, or any precinct level. What are primaries? Primary, an election where voters select candidates for an upcoming general election. Winning candidates will have delegates sent to the National Party Convention as their party's United States presidential nominee. So we will talk about National Party Conventions later on, right after this stage. State primaries are run by the state and local government. If you remember, we said, okay, the caucus are held at the county, district, and that's a meeting of local members. And the primary is, state primaries are run by state and local government. That's the difference between caucus and primaries, but the overall goal of both of them are the same, the selection of the nominees. And the nominee then select the delegates to the national party conventions. Okay, when the primaries and caucuses are over, most political parties hold a national convention. This is when the winning candidate receive their nomination. So let's say, what's national convention? National convention, it happens July to early September, and parties hold nominating conventions to choose their candidates. Okay, they have nominations before, and now it comes to select their candidates. In case of election 2020, it happened between late May to August 2020. Nominating conventions scheduled and happen, including those of the minor third parties. Okay, after the primaries and caucuses, most political parties which are holding the national conventions, and each party to finalize the selection of one presidential nominee. So, what happens at the national political convention? Okay, so in the caucus or primaries, we have the nominees, and then we are coming to the national convention, and national political convention has some other responsibilities or some actions to take. Okay, so conventions finalize a party's choice for presidential and vice presidential nominees. To become the presidential nominee, a candidate typically has to win a majority of the delegates. We talked about the delegates that each nominee for the presidential elections, after the primaries and caucuses, they select their delegates. So this usually happens through the party's primaries and caucuses. It is then confirmed through a vote of the delegates at the national convention. Now, at each convention, the presidential candidate chooses a running mate. It means vice presidential candidate itself. But if no candidate gets the majority of a party's delegates during the primaries and caucuses, then convention delegates choose the nominee. This happens through additional round of voting. To make it more clear, let's say who are delegates. Delegates are people authorized to present or to represent others as an elected representative to a political party conference. So these are the people who voting for the nominees to come up with a final nominee. When the final nominee is selected, the final nominee comes up to choose a running mate or vice presidential candidate. Okay, so we had primary and caucuses, then we had our national convention. Now, this is time for the presidential election debates, which happens during September and October. In 2020, the first debate between Trump and Biden took place on September 29, 2020. The next debate was scheduled to take place on October 15th, but was later cancelled due to Trump's COVID-19 diagnosis and refusal to appear remotely rather than in person. As a result, 2020 had the fewest debates since 1996. The final debate took place on October 22. Same as the debates between the presidential candidates, there are debates between the vice presidential candidate as well. For 2020, additionally, a debate between the vice presidential candidates Mike Pence and Kamala Harris took place on October 7th. Okay, caucus and primaries happened, national convention happened, debate happens. Now it is the election, the general election, or the election day, which is step 3, which is today, November 3rd, 2020. Okay, so let's say, what is election day? Election day is the annual day set by the law for the general election. It's the Tuesday next after the first Monday in the month of November of the election year. So what happens? The presidential candidates campaign throughout the country in an attempt to win the support of the general population. Of course, that's the ultimate aim. People in every state across the country vote for one president and one vice president. Sometimes early voting and postal voting also happens. It means most of the states allows early voting, or letting voters cast their ballot before election day. And this 2020, as far as I remember, New York and Maryland had their early votings. An early voting period varies from 4 to 50 days prior to election day. Unconditional early voting in person is allowed in 32 states and in DC. And the 2008 presidential election, 30% of votes were early votes. Let's see what will be the percentage of early voters for presidential election 2020. Also, all states have some kind of absentee ballot system. Unconditional absentee voting by mail is allowed in 27 states in DC, and with an excuse in another 21 states. Unconditional permanent absentee voting is allowed in 7 states and in DC. In Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Utah, and Hawaii, all major elections are by postal voting, when ballot papers sent to the voters several weeks before election day. In 29 states, postal votes must be received on or before election day. Other states have later deadlines, with California election law allowing mailed-in ballot to arrive at the election office up to 17 days after election day. Some states, like Texas, gives overseas and military voters extra time to mail in their ballots. Okay, so this is the election day. Everyone goes out to polling centers and they cast their votes. Okay, what happens next? What happens next? This is the Electoral College. So, and this is the fourth step. What is Electoral College? Electoral College. In other US elections, candidates are elected directly by the popular vote. Let's say general vote, people vote. But the president and vice presidents are not elected directly by citizens. Instead, they are chosen by electors through a process called the Electoral College. The process of using electors comes from the Constitution, and it was a compromise between a popular vote by citizens and a vote in Congress. So, let's say in the Electoral College system, each state gets a certain number of electors based on its total number of representatives in Congress. So let's see, who are electors? Elector is a member of the Electoral College who vote to choose the president and vice president. And each elector casts one electoral vote following the general election. There are a total of 538 electoral votes. The candidates that gets more than half, it means 270, wins the election. Each state gets as many electors as it has members of Congress, it means in House and Senate. Including Washington, D.C., 3 electors, there are currently 538 electors in all, as I mentioned before. And if you look at the map here, this map shows the number of electors in each state. And let's see, like California is the largest number, which is 55. And then we can come down to Texas. Texas has 38 electors. Then comes down, let's say, to Florida and New York. They both have 29 electors. And if we come down, we see Illinois, it has 20. Pennsylvania, it has 20. And in this case, in which come down to the lowest number, which are DC, Delaware, and some other places. So this is the map, shows all those 538 electors located in different states. Now, each state's political parties chooses their own slate of potential electors. Who is chosen to be an elector? How and when? It varies by state. Now, let's see how does the Electoral College process work. After you cast your ballot for president, your vote goes to the statewide tally. A candidate needs the vote of at least 270 electors. It means more than half of the electors to win the presidential election. In most cases, a projected winner is announced on election night in November after you vote. It means tonight. But the actual Electoral College vote takes place in mid-December when the electors meet in their states. While the Constitution does not require electors to follow their state's popular vote, many states' laws do. Though it's rare, electors have challenged those laws and voted for someone else. But in July 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that those states' laws are constitutional. Electors must follow their state's popular vote if the state has passed such a law. But there were some special situations, or it's possible to win the Electoral College but lose the popular vote. And this happens in 2016, and also in 2000, and 3 times in the 1800s. If you look at this chart, what happened in 2016 and how the person who had the popular votes but lost the electoral college, and then Trump became the president. So this table shows all those information. Look at the percentage of each of them, and also look at the number of the people who voted for them, and also look at the number of the electoral votes, which is the final decision based on which the president was announced. So what happens if no candidate wins the majority of electoral votes? If no candidate receives the majority of electoral votes, the vote goes to the House of Representatives. House members choose the new president from among the top 3 candidates. The Senate elects the vice president from the remaining top 2 candidates. And this situation only happened once, and that was in 1824, where the House of Representatives elected John Quincy Adams as president. Okay, when at the mid-December electorals voted for early January of the next calendar year, Congress counts all the electoral votes and certifies them. In case of election 2020, this will happen on Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. After the Congress counted and certified the electoral votes, on January 20th, this is the inauguration day, and the president-elect and the vice president-elect take the oath of office and are inaugurated. Hope you understand this one. Let's see who got the most popular votes, and we'll be looking forward for the electoral votes and then for the Congress. Have a great day. Thank you.